Hi, I'm Dan McClure, and I'm talking today about ecosystem innovation and the possibilities of driving a next generation of innovation management. This is one of a series of talks done for the innovation management community of practice, and it was presented originally at the June 2024 meeting. Now, I'd like to begin by asking a trick question. What's the right way to do innovation? We could rigorously analyze and plan every project, getting all the details right so that we squeeze out any chance of change or risk. Or we could quickly build a prototype, test it, and then adapt it as we go, learning and failing fast if it doesn't work. Now, depending on when you learn to do innovation, you probably have a strong feeling about which one of these answers is right. But the reality is, it really depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to build a bridge and you need to have all the construction work done to precise details, then getting that analysis and plan in place, that really makes sense. On the other hand, if you're trying to discover how a new mobile app should work, well, then building a quick prototype, testing it, and failing fast is exactly the right thing to do too. Both of these practices make sense, and they expose a rule that the nature of the challenge drives the type of innovation practice that you should have. Now, this is a pretty powerful concept because what it says is that there isn't a single innovation practice that's the right thing to do. But we can even go further. The challenge drives the practice, and the practice also drives the type of leadership, management, and roles that you have when you're building an innovation management program. So here we find that the challenge, the practices, and the management all are connected together. So if we're engineering a big project like a bridge or doing something very complex with lots of little parts that we need to analyze in detail, the practice is going to tell us to actually have very rigorous steps, have stage gates along each way, make sure that we get approvals. It's the kind of thing that you see with log frames and system development lifecycle methodologies. It's very good for building this kind of practice. And it requires a management structure that's really about top-down control. You want to make sure that you get everything done correctly. And then once you've got that in place, you want to make sure that you're managing compliance with the plan. The goal is to have no surprises. And so this is a very rigid, structured way of doing innovation. And it delivers things like bridges. Now, imagine we have different types of innovation. So what if we just want to make incremental improvements to an existing system? We don't want to analyze everything hugely in detail. Or, as we mentioned before, what if we want to invent something new, a new mobile app or a new practice or a new something small that we could go out and test? Well, then we're going to replace that top-down command and control with a more adaptive learning model. Here we're going to want to act, learn things, and then pivot if we need to, so that we can make adjustments based on what we learn. And this is a really powerful tool for exploring new spaces. And a lot of innovation programs are now built around this idea. They encourage you to find a focused problem, develop a specific solution, and leverage fast-moving pilots as your tools for doing this. You might have seen things like the double diamond, where you diverge, lots of post-it notes up on the wall, and then converge on the right idea. You may be encouraged to do minimum viable products, MVPs, and failing fast. And all of this allows you to produce specific products, pilots that allow you to test a new idea. And this is a pretty powerful concept. And many innovators in the aid sector, in the nonprofit community, have gotten good at this. The challenge is, even though we've gotten good at these skills, this ideation and the lightweight pilots, The results have often been disappointing. We get lots and lots of pilots, but the reality is they're like baby bunnies that never grow up. One innovation manager described their portfolio of pilots as a filing cabinet filled with broken dreams. This isn't good. If you do innovations, but they don't deliver impact, then there's a gap. And the question is, why? Why aren't we getting the kind of impact out of innovation that we want? This is the question that Jenny Wild and I looked at when we were developing the book, Do Bigger Things. Now, in this book, we asked the question, what's been going wrong with pilots? If we're not going to be able to do everything like we're designing a bridge and pilots aren't working, where's there a gap? And why does that gap exist? One of the things we did is we stepped back and said, can we map out the way those innovations work? And so we created a framework that basically says, let's look at projects from the smallest ones to the very largest ones. The largest one would be a major national program or a bridge or something like that. Small one might be a small incremental improvement. And put those along the x-axis along on that way. And then let's look at projects that we fully understand, things that we can analyze in detail. Classic engineering project is like this, versus those that are really, there's lots of unknowns, so we don't know what's going on. And we'll put those along the y-axis. The big engineering projects, those bridges that we can analyze in detail, or the incremental innovations that we can really look at very closely, they're very well-behaved problems, and they sit along the bottom of our matrix. In contrast, the new small things that we're testing out and are exploring, they tend to sit along the left-hand side of this layout. What you'll see is that there's a gap, and this is all the stuff in the upper right-hand corner. This is the big, messy, unexplored, uncertain stuff. We call it the real world. This is the stuff where you've got complexity, multiple pieces all going on, and you'll notice that we don't have an innovation practice that addresses that. That's why it's important for us today to begin to think about, do we need a new innovation practice? Something suited for big, complex challenges. And that's what ecosystem innovation is. Now, let me explain a little bit about what we're talking about. An ecosystem is a combination of multiple parts, where it's people, organizations, technology, resources, and they're all connected up with one another in some way, so that the actions of one feed into the actions of another, and you create effectively a system that does something. A school is an ecosystem. A family is an ecosystem. An entire nation of factory operations is an ecosystem. What really stands out when you look at these is that they are incredibly powerful. They're incredibly woven into the way we actually solve problems every day. But we can't have complete knowledge. And they're always subject to change, because remember, the pieces of these ecosystems are people, organizations, and dynamic relationships. Nothing's going to stay stable. But if we could design and build innovations that were actually ecosystems, we might do something really powerful. Now, that might sound a bit scary, because it sounds like we've got to really embrace a lot more complexity. And intuitively, you may say to yourself, what we really need to do here is focus down. It's all well and good to imagine that there's all these different things out there, but really, seriously, shouldn't we be focusing on something that we can actually manage and control? And that's deceptive, because in truth, just because we've arbitrarily made a problem or a solution smaller, that doesn't mean that the complexity goes away. We don't erase the complexity. at the point that we say, oh, we've decided to focus at something small and narrow. Instead, all of that complexity still exists, and we ignore it, then things just don't work. What's exciting is once you realize that the complexity is there and that you're really better off dealing with it, that complexity actually gives you a lot of power. And when we talk about all the hard problems that aren't being solved or that we worry about not being able to solve, and many times it's the complexity that gives us the power to step up and do something. Let me show you an example. Electric vehicles are seen as a key contributor to reducing climate change. So what do we need for that? Well, we need to be able to manufacture them. We need people to buy them. We might need an incentive program to encourage them to buy them. We're going to need some roadways for them to drive on. And that entire ecosystem needs to be in place for cars to make it into people's hands. So there's really no avoiding this. We're going to have multiple pieces if we want to get more EV vehicles out. But the truth is, this is still too narrow. The reality is there's a lot more that needs to be done. It's not enough to manufacture the EVs. We also have to manufacture the batteries. And if we're going to have batteries, we're going to need charging stations, and not just charging stations that pop out of nowhere, but we're also going to need owners and investors, businesses that are willing to take on these charging stations as an ongoing responsibility. And of course, it does no good at all if we're powering our electric vehicles with coal-fired power plants to generate the electricity. So we're going to need new renewable electric supplies and electric grid upgrades to deal with that. And what about the social costs here? What about the people who can't afford a new car? Well, what are you going to do about them? Are they going to be forced to hold on to their old gas guzzler while everybody moves into this new ecosystem? The reality is, this is the unavoidable complexity of this challenge. And if we want to be successful, we can't close our eyes to it. But let's say we embrace it and go just a step further. What if we said, instead of just looking at these areas of things we need to do, we add even more complexity? What if we add self-driving vehicles to our electric vehicles? Now, these self-driving cars could offer services like Uber to everybody. So now you wouldn't have to buy a car. You could, instead of trying to figure out how to fund somebody's purchase of an electric vehicle, you could just provide subsidies for their Uber services. And instead of having charging stations everywhere, these EVs that have autonomous driving could automatically go back to the charging station whenever they were running low. So they could have a centralized charging station. And think about other benefits. Now we're talking about the possibility of saying, well, these EV autonomous vehicles are driving around all the time. We don't really need parking spaces. And in some cities, that means like 15% of the land area is freed up. And we suddenly have this entire gift of really high value urban land that we can take advantage of, either to bring more people into dense living situations, another contributor to climate adaptation, or to make those urban areas even more livable. Now, this is the idea of ecosystem innovation. We look at all the different parts that we need and we ask, how can we bring together the different pieces so that we get the greatest value? And that's pretty exciting stuff because, as we can see here, we're able to look at some pretty tough challenges. Now, you may argue, okay, that's good, but honestly, a lot of the things that we need to do are really far more simple. And I would have agreed with you before, commodity products, some technology products like a water filter, or something that's really low tech, like grain bags. All of these seem like they ought to be really well suited to the small pilot, develop a pilot, and then just go and do it. The challenge is even these very simple, what seem like perfectly adapted for, those other forms of innovation. The reality is there's a lot of complexity behind them too. Let's take the example of a cook stove. Now, a cook stove, there's millions, it seems like, of cook stoves out there, and they deal with a really important problem, open fire cooking. But if we really look at what you need for a cook stove to be successful, it's not simply a cook stove. You need a way to do production. You need a way to do distribution. You need a way to sell it, train people. You need to adapt recipes. You've got to get people buying into this new form of cooking. Got to deal with disruptions and how fuel was provided before, how it'll be provided in the future. There's all these different pieces that create an ecosystem around what seems like a pretty straightforward piece of technology. And that was the case in all of the three prior examples that I just showed you. Now, if we want to become organizations that can do this kind of innovation, where we look at a big challenge, we accept that it's a big challenge, and then we create a sufficiently complex, sophisticated solution to take it on, what do we need to do as innovation managers? What's the innovation program look like for this kind of work? It begins with leadership setting a bold mission. Leaders need to let people know that they expect them to take on these hard, messy, wicked problems, and that they expect them to develop solutions that are big enough, sophisticated enough, difficult enough to actually do the job. I love this quote from Daniel Burnham, who was an architect around 1900 and did some really amazing architecture. But what I really appreciate is the quote that he has, which is make no little plans. They have no magic to stir men's blood, and probably themselves will not be realized. Make big plans, aim high, and hope and work. That's the message that leadership begins this journey. They need to let people know we're aiming for the harder, more difficult challenges, and we're going to do the kind of challenging work that it takes to address them. Then you need to have the tools to actually be able to solve those challenges. Now, you may have noticed how ecosystems look a lot like Lego blocks. There's all these different pieces that you can put together. And the more Lego blocks you have, just like when you were a kid, if you had more Lego blocks, you could build more cool stuff. So the idea of an innovation program now shouldn't be to hide off in the corner so that you don't annoy the rest of the organization. Instead, you should be engaging the entire enterprise. The entire enterprise brings Lego blocks, capabilities that you can use to assemble a new ecosystem solution. That should include supporting functions. It's not just some particular area of specialty. It's HR, it's contracting, it's everybody in the organization ultimately contributes to a working ecosystem. It's also people outside the organization. So here's now a chance to engage external collaborators in a form of innovation where they provide new Lego blocks for you, and as a result, expand your ability to deal with difficult challenges. And of course, new technologies are Lego blocks too. So as we talk about AI or we talk about blockchain or these other new technologies, it's not just about what an AI application. It's what AI as another piece, as a new Lego block can fit into the broader ecosystem that you're inventing. And that becomes the thing that unlocks power. So we want to pull innovation out of a corner and we want to engage the entire organization and be. Now, if we're going to do that, we're really going to need a different kind of person someone who is used to working across organizations. We call these innovation choreographers. And if you look for what their natural traits are, they're big picture thinkers. They're natural generalists. They have resumes that are all over the place. And they're really good at crossing silos within an organization, across different organizations, across different challenges. They enjoy breaking systems that aren't working well because they can imagine a new and more powerful system that will work. And they're powerful storytellers about these big ideas. Innovation choreographers are a new role that is necessary when you move to this new practice of ecosystem innovation. And so one of the goals of an organization and its innovation management team has to be to find these innovation choreographers, nurture them, and support them. Fortunately, an awful lot of natural innovation managers are, quite frankly, innovation choreographers. So there's often a lot of affinity. Finally, the rest of the organization needs to be along on this journey. One of the things that really struck me a few years ago when I was in Geneva at a workshop where we were talking to senior innovators, and we asked, so what's the biggest barrier to doing things at scale? And I was expecting money, technical difficulties, coordinating multiple actors. But the reality was, what they said was, people didn't buy in, people didn't come along. And so, if we're going to do big, bold ideas where change happens across an entire organization or an ecosystem surrounding the organization, we've got to get a culture that supports that kind of change and embraces that kind of complexity. Now, this is hard because we've really gotten used to organizations that lived in a world where opportunities were long lived, where you would maybe invent something, you claim a place in the world, and then you continue to tap that value proposition for years and years and years. And this, of course, happens in commercial markets, but it also happens in the nonprofit and aid space too. How many of our organizations defined who they were 50 years ago, have basically been doing the same kind of thing, harvesting those skills? The challenge is with fast moving problems and new opportunity, new innovations coming from all around the world, those long-term opportunities are being squeezed. They're becoming obsolete. And as a result, change is being forced on organizations. And the folks inside the organization need to realize that this change is not going to be optional. You are going to have to embrace and participate in big change if you're going to remain relevant, if you can continue to do things that are worthwhile and impactful in the world. Now, it gets even more challenging than this, because the truth is, this change, this obsolescence followed by a new innovation, followed by more change, is not something that happens just once. It happens over and over and over again. And as a result, organizations that are really good as ecosystem innovators don't prepare for a single change that puts them to a new normal. They recognize that they have to manage repeated waves of change, innovation, and opportunity. The good news is this keeps them relevant, this delivers more value into the world. The challenging news is that you can't become comfortable. Everybody in the organization has to be in a position where they're ready to accept and embrace this complexity and change. Now, this is really important because the moment of history we are at is rather unforgiving. We have been given amazing tools, the technologies, the ability to collaborate around the world, the resources that we have to solve hard problems is literally unprecedented. But likewise, the challenges we have are complex, messy, they are wicked problems, and they are everywhere. And so I think Ian Golden and Chris Katerna really got it right when they said it is the conceit of each generation to think that they have been born into a historic moment. But this time it's true. We live in a historic moment where innovation claims a disproportionate role in whether or not we thrive or we are threatened. I like this metaphor. Imagine you're in a boat and a wave comes up and you're thrown over. If you don't know how to swim, you're going to drown. That's going to be a catastrophe. That one wave may cost you your life. On the other hand, that wave comes, you're thrown overboard, you have the strength and the ability to swim boldly to shore, then it was just a push for you to go do something different, something new, something that rose to the challenge. As innovation managers, we get to help our organizations become good swimmers, become the organizations that are able to rise to the challenge. And without the kind of support that really powerful innovation, that upper right-hand corner gives us, we're going to be the folks that fall off the boat and can't swim. So I'm excited. I think there's huge opportunity here. I think if we follow the problem, that we want to do complex things with sophisticated solutions, that requires new practices of ecosystem innovation, and then recognize that we need the four elements of a successful ecosystem organization. Well, then we're going to be able to do this kind of work, and we're going to really be able to make it. So thanks again. I'm Dan McClure, and it's been great having a chance to talk to you for the Innovation Management Community Practice.